Okay, what do you reckon? I think we should make a start. G'day, everyone. My name is Quincy, coming to you live from Melbourne, Australia, on the land of the Wurundjeri people, the Woiwurrung speakers, and we pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We're on their land. My name's Quincy Hall. I represent Diversity Atlas, which is a cultural diversity mapping and measurement tool, and therein ends my sales spiel. It gives me great pleasure today to welcome you all to our inaugural webinar broadcast. It's going to be a quarterly series called Quincy Speaks to People Smarter Than Him. I just wanted on record, I don't like talking about myself in the third person, that wasn't actually my intention to be the title. That was actually just my description of what the webinar series would be about. But our marketing team, who was standing right in front of me, thought, oh no, we'll just go with that as a title. So we're going to be doing this quarterly. Looking forward to this hopefully over the next year or two, getting some great guests on. And we're getting off to a great start, I think, on this webinar series. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you one of my colleagues, Wanah Bumakor. And he's coming to us live from Cameroon, where, I don't know what time of day it is over there. Wanah, what time is it in Cameroon at the moment?
It's 1 a.m.
1 a.m. Actually, it's not as bad as I thought it might be. Yeah. But thank you so much for joining us at this terrible hour for you. And look, Wanah has a master's degree in peace and development studies. He's based in Cameroon. He's a conflict management expert and a peace negotiator. And Wanah, we're going to be talking about your article that's we put up on our LinkedIn page recently, and there's going to be a longer form article that's going to be published in an academic journal coming up soon. And the article is called Ethnic Diversity in Africa from Pitfall to Business Opportunity. And may I just say at the outset, what a wonderful article it was. Just preparing for the webinar this morning, I thought, I'll highlight some of my favorite lines just so I can ask about, what you mean by that and to expand. And I couldn't narrow it down. There was about 80 lines in there that I highlighted and just thought, that's just beautiful, beautifully written. And to everybody watching this webinar, whether live or recording, I highly recommend having a read of it if you haven't already. It's a fantastic article. But just to get us going, before we touch on the article, Wanah, I plead guilty to not knowing nearly enough about Africa and African history, and in particular your country, Cameroon. I was wondering if you could just enlighten me and the listeners. Would you be able to maybe just give us a brief history of Cameroon? What is Cameroon? How were the borders made? When was the country formed, and who's there?
Yeah, thank you, Quincy, for having me. And I feel honored to be the first guest in your very important series, and let people not take it for something true. I'm not smarter than you. And so I just want to share some experiences that coming from my own perspective and what I've lived, and from people to learn. And that's the way we can help to build understand each other and build intercultural understanding and make the world a better place, because it will save us from a lot of conflict and then a lot of embarrassment also. So I think I'll first begin with talking about Africa, because not many people know about Africa. And in some other parts of the world, they think that Africa is just a country. But Africa is a very, very vast continent, big land area. And it's about 30 million square kilometer. It's important to know the size. That is, the United States can fit in Africa, China, India, all of Western Europe can enter into Africa, even Brazil. So it's a vast continent. And when you talk about vast continent, it has 54 states, with the latest that was created in 2011, which was South Sudan. And it has big states as big as Western Europe, like Congo. Congo is almost the size of Western Europe, and very small states like Seychelles, which is about maybe one tenth of Melbourne. So that's just tell you about how Africa is, and very vast. Many people know about the savannah, the Sahel, that is the desert in Africa, but there's also the mountain, a lot of mountain ranges, plateaus, grass fields, thick rainforests, also the thick equatorial forests, where you can go and meet animals, shrubs, lands, and coastal areas. So great, interesting lakes and rivers. So there's so many things you can see in Africa, and you can understand that how diverse the environment is and has an impact on the people, because someone who grows in the desert or in the Sahel is completely different, will not think the same way like someone who is from an equatorial forest, or someone who lives along the river borders and so on and so forth. So that's why we have a lot of, Africa has about more than 2,000 languages spoken in the continent, and counting, because we cannot get all the languages. So to come now to Cameroon, Cameroon is going to be interesting how the name came about, because it can tell you of how colonization has impacted the experience of many Africans. And so Cameroon, the name came from the Portuguese nations who came in the 15th century, and they went to the River Rui, and discovered streams. And because they saw a lot of streams there, they said, wow, let's just call this place the River of Streams. And Cameroons, Roi de Cameroons, as he said in Portuguese. And that's where the Cameroon came about. And I remember during the 2014 Olympic Games, which was hosted in Brazil, when Cameroon was marching and the name Camerones, people were laughing at us and saying, which type of country is called streams? So that's a little bit about how most of Africa is. And but after that period, there were nations that came, because, European history is made up of discovering. I discovered this place. You go and meet people and you say, I discover America, whereas people were living there. And so that's what the Europeans felt about Cameroon. So they had been trading, and the British were trading before there was the official annexation of Cameroon with the Germano-Douala Treaty in 1884, where Cameroon became a protectorate. And so during that period, after the First World War, when Germany lost to the Allied forces, in 1916, the French and the British drove away the Germans here in Cameroon, because the British were in Nigeria, a neighboring country of Cameroon, and the French were in Chad, Central Africa, Gabon, all these countries that surround Cameroon. So they came and they drove away the Germans. And since then, with the League of Nations, they had a mandated territory of dividing. That is, these are decisions that were taken in Europe of dividing a territory without the consent of the people. And so Cameroon was divided. 80% went to France, and 20% went to Britain. And so there was a part that was colonized, which was under British rule, and the British rule was indirect rule. And there was another part that was the French, under the French, which was a direct rule called assimilation. Maybe I'll come on those issues later. But what happened was that when countries were moving towards independence, Britain wanted the English part to join Nigeria. and to make it a bigger territory. But the Cameroonians, the Anglophone British Southern Cameroons, as it was called, refused. We did not want to join the Nigerians, and so they wanted to be an independent territory. So the British refused and told them that you have two options through the United Nations, either joining Nigeria or joining French Cameroon. And a plebiscite was organized in 1961, and people decided, because it was all the decision of the United Nations, not of the people. And through the plebiscite now, the Cameroonians, the British Southern Cameroons, prefer to join their borders of French Cameroon. And since that time, there have been difficulties between the dominating French-speaking Cameroonians and the English-speaking Cameroonians, because they are the minority. And there have been a lot of difficulties, because though when we got our independence, the official languages was English and French with equal status, but because the majority of Cameroonians are French-speaking, the French-speaking has been dominating even the law, the educational system, the way of thinking, and it has brought a lot of confrontation. Until that's why we are in a conflict since 2018, where the Anglophone zone wants to secede or separate from the Cameroon. So there are many countries in that situation. South Sudan separated from Sudan, and there are other parts, but it's going to come more details why countries want to separate from each other, because they did not come together in the first place. They were imposed to live together, and that's what has been bringing about ethnic conflict and ethnic tension in Africa.
Yeah, it's interesting. So much there that I just wasn't aware of. Like the German presence. Growing up, I just had this view. Okay, Cameroon is a French-speaking country, but you're saying 20% English. You mentioned the plebiscite about whether to join Nigeria or stay in Cameroon. What was the vote? Was it 50-50? Was it 60-40, or was it 100%? What was and what's the thinking now?
I think it was quite close, but because there were two parts, British Northern Cameroon, which voted to join Nigeria, and it's part of Nigeria now, and British Southern Cameroons also voted now to join French Cameroon. And it was quite close. I think it was, I can remember but it was not a overwhelming victory. And when people were coming together, they wanted to be united because they were divided. And that was the sense of Pan-Africanism at the time, that there should be African unity and African United States, United States of Africa. And that Pan-Africanism movement was very strong at the time, because they wanted to bring out all colonial boundaries and restructure states. But the Cold War situation and the new colonialism that followed did not make it possible, because most people who remained as presidents or who took up the positions of leaders became somehow agents of the former colonizers.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you're touching there on, the ethnic groups as well. So in that post-colonial period, you mentioned in your article, and we'll start touching on your article about, you wrote at the start here, the devastating effect of colonialism and the rapid pace of globalization in the 21st century have influenced some people to perceive certain types of diversity as more divisive than others. And I was wondering if you could touch on, maybe at the outset, just talk about, how many ethnic groups are in Cameroon, and how many, who are the major ethnic groups, and what was, when I think about the echoes of colonialism, so once independence has been given, who were the ethnic groups that retained control and who were marginalized? Can you speak a little bit about that?
I think that will take me to a lot of politics.
Well, I always say we do
is
culture, not politics. So if we can stick with, I don't want to put you in a corner of being too political, but
I want to always remind you that politics is inevitable.
Yeah,
and but anyway, I'm not going to be partisan. I'm just going to bring out of the picture of what happened. You know, during the colonial period, there was some sort of divide and rule, you know, for the colonizers to have control over their territory. They could not make tribes or ethnic groups to unite. that was not their goal, because it was going to be counterproductive to their objectives. So they had to make sure that ethnic groups should not know each other. So there was some sort of favoritism, that is, they'll choose an ethnic group and give him some favoritism privileges, and try to marginalize the other ones. And most of the groups that were marginalized at the time were what they call indigents, that is, people who were of the land. And so, for example, the example I used in the article, which was from Cameroon, but it's also, you can see it in other African countries, is in the Sawa land, that is a fertile land where most of the plantations of Cameroon is found. And so it's a very fertile land, very fertile, and it made people of the place, the Sawa, the Bakweris, not to work so hard to cultivate crops. And so people in the grass field, about 400 kilometers away from the Bakweri lands, were hard workers, because their soil was not as fertile as that in the Bakweri lands. So the Germans, now, it started with the Germans. They went and got people from 400 kilometers, and they came now and settled, and that's what they named settlers. And if you know, there are some conflicts that they call now settler-indigent conflicts. And it's really a big conflict. Even up to today, it's still existing, because when the settlers came, they were privileged by the colonizers, gave them more position, gave them land, and had more opportunities. And it brought about tension. And so it has made the people to be somehow marginalized, the indigents, and brought a lot of provocation. And for another glaring example, also, it's what happened in Rwanda with the Tutsis and the Hutus. The Tutsis, being the minority, were given privileges over the Hutus, because the Tutsis were about 14% of the population, and the Hutus about 80%. And so these privileges made them that is, to make sure that the minority can depend on the colonizers for security. And they started marginalizing the majority. Is just also somehow how the minority whites in South Africa were ruling over the majority blacks under the apartheid period. So these are the things that the colonizers did, and it was well calculated, and it brought about tensions. We just fell into the trap. And so when we came now to independence, it was not longer an issue of it brought about, first of all, the divide and rule policies of the colonizers brought about hatred, mistrust between ethnic groups. So once we're coming to independence, that's what people were thinking about, having power to control the other one, or to sideline him, or to marginalize him. And that was the mindset of most people, because given the fact that many of them not many people were educated at the time, that is, who went to Western education schools. only 20% could speak English and French perfectly, or Portuguese in other territories, or Spanish in other territories. So it brought about a lot of problems, and that's why our politics since that time has been defined through ethnic lines, tribal lines. And up to today, if you closely watch the last presidential elections in Nigeria, you'll discover that ethnic politics still has a strong role in the political setting in Nigeria, or in Africa in general.
Yeah, I found it interesting. You talk about favoritism of certain ethnic groups by the colonialists, but what was interesting in your article, talking about actually moving them, geographically away from their traditional home. Some would stay, but then moving them into areas that they're not from, which causes geographical and regional conflict. And from my understanding from previous chats we've had, is that the ethnic groups largely in Cameroon, is this right to say, are regional based?
Yeah, sometimes it depends, because most of them, when they have similar environments, they behave the same way. And sometimes, because of rivers and the mountain, the environment, you discover that ethnic groups of the same background are always on the same area, because they are families and communal. So that's what has really mostly defined the way they are. But it's important to note that concerning the moving of one ethnic group to another, it was just somehow there are push and pull factors to that. And it's just like in the global world we live today, many people sometimes are excited to go to where they can have opportunities, where they can what they say, greener pastures, and have a better life. And that's where we are going, because the world is divided today. People should know, because you see many people leaving one country to another place because there are more opportunities there. And that's why it's difficult today to see a homogeneous country. You go to Germany, which was somehow considered homogeneous. You will see communities of Africans there, Nigerians, Cameroonians, Asians, Indians, and so that's where the world is going. And so this issue of diversity is something which we cannot escape from it, given the way the globalization has been. It has brought about some imbalance, just like the colonial period. It was an uneven distribution of wealth or development. And so there were some places where you could go and get opportunities, and people had to move there to see how they can maybe pay taxes, because taxes were imposed on people, and so to live a better life, because they had to also force them, because it was also a brutal colonization, where they had to force people, forced labor, and some sort of slavery at the time. So sometimes some people never had a choice but to go there. And so given the environment, and sometimes there were some places like in Chad, which were just completely neglected by the colonizers. And like the French, they just settled only in the south, and never did any investment in the north, nothing like constructing roads, building schools, nothing of such. So it made them to when these people came together as a nation, it brought about tension, because they did not know each other and they were forced to live together. And when you force people to live together without really bringing any social contract or any agreement prior to that, it was just like forcing two people to get married, and they have not known each other I think it's going to bring a lot of problems.
I can imagine. Speaking of that, I mean, another line that jumped out, which was very sad to read, you wrote, colonization in Africa was so absolute and arbitrary that it determined what the people could plant, frequently cash crops that the indigenous people could eat. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. From what I understand, the colonial powers wanted you to plant and produce Western product as opposed to indigenous product. And if you could talk a little about what that was and what the impact of that is today.
Yes, that's really, they say the colonization was arbitrary in Africa, and it decided that it was not there for the Africans. When the colonizers came, they were not trying to create a territory where they could respond to the needs of the people. They were just there for their interests. And their interest was to have access to raw materials for their industries. You need to remember that before it was in the 14th centuries, what they were interested in was manual labor, that is human resources. That's why they came and took slaves from Africa, because they had plantations. So when we went towards the industrial period, because industrialization started in Europe around the second half of the 18th century, and what they were interested in was not human resources. Now they were interested in raw materials and natural resources. So when they came to Africa, they discovered that they had a fertile place where they could have plant cash crops, because these are crops that you could not eat, like rubber, cocoa, coffee, tea, because we're not drinking tea, we're not drinking coffee or cocoa. And so all of these things were what people were focusing on in agriculture. They were not working on things that could feed them. They were working on things that they could sell to the Europeans, and the Europeans, they were not getting anything. So when you go, you work, you need to go, and the small money you have, you need to go and look for food. And so all of these cash crops, that's why they call it cash crops that are for cash, not to eat. So all these things now went to Europe, where they had to manufacture it and sell it back to us, where we'll buy it double the price. And these policies have continued for centuries, even up to today, because most of the African countries got their independence, they have not been able to change the structure of the state to respond to the needs of the people. So that's why we talk about neocolonialism that is still continuing, because Africans, if you see, it's just there for oil, gas, cocoa. It's just, I always share this example with you. Switzerland is the highest producer of chocolates, and many people, I think you have enjoyed Swiss chocolates, but they don't have one plantation or one tree of cocoa. So they come and get cocoa in Africa, and they buy it at a cheaper price, go and manufacture it, and it brings about a multiplier effect in the economy, and come and sell it to us maybe 10 times the price that it got from us. And since then, we have not really had leaders who have been dedicated to make sure that this can change. And we are still suffering from that, because it's a whole process of changing people to think with an entrepreneurial spirit. And it has to deal also a lot with our educational system. And I may come to that further, because it has made people to focus more on civic education, that is trying to become politicians and not businessmen. And when we got our independence, most people were not business people. They were politicians who thought that they could become rich by replacing the whites. And that mindset is still with us. And that's why in my article, I talked about from pitfalls to business opportunities, because when people have the entrepreneurial spirit, when they think business, you cannot hate people, or you cannot be a businessman and you hate people. I don't think you'll be able to sell your things. So once you see that you're a businessman, you love people, you know that everything turns around people, and they're the ones who make your products better, and all ideas from all sides to make sure that your product is better will be welcome. And so that's the mindset that has to really most Africans need to inculcate right now. And I think bit by bit we are going towards that level. And with a young population, it's also good to mention that Africa is the continent with the highest, youngest population in the world. And so they're having a new mindset, new way of thinking. And many people, especially with the digital economy we find ourselves in, are really investing now in business. And once you have this business idea, you see the value of people, and you want to work with whoever you think can make him better.
Yeah, just touching on that, as far as employment, you mentioned in your article, in Australia, nobody wants to be accused of what we would call nepotism or cronyism, giving jobs to their friends and family. But you point out that, in Africa, with a lot of the ethnic groups, it's actually a moral thing to do. It's a good thing to be able to give jobs to your friends and family in a way. That might not be good for the business itself, but there's a kind of clash there, isn't it? It's ethical to give a job to your cousins and the people from your tribe, but maybe it's not. I was wondering if you could talk about that.
I never said that it was a good thing. And I just said that because it's not good for business.
No, it's not good.
And even for your image, especially in a multi-ethnic countries like Cameroon, it will bring a lot of problems. But the temptation is there. The temptation is there because of the communal nature of African families. And as I mentioned in the article, we don't have a nuclear way of looking at the family. We have a collective communal way of looking at the family. Family is not just father, mother, and children. No, in Africa, family is mother, father, cousin, uncle, and all of those things. Because if you go to African languages, it's difficult to find an African language where you would see the word cousin or uncle or niece or nephew. All of that, you call your auntie my mother, you call your uncle my father, and so it's really a broad perspective, a communal way of looking at family, not limited only to the nuclear family. So we had a broad way. So the temptation was high because once you go, because we need to understand how Africans live. When we're growing up, I know it's not really the habit anymore. We used to eat together. That is, you call all children. People don't eat separately from separate plates. You bring a big plate, and everyone eats at the same time together, just to show that you are one. And that's if you go to some African villages, that habit is still there. And when someone goes to farm, because I know people know about the Ubuntu philosophy, which is I am because we are because I am. So you cannot think individually, you think communally. When you go to farm, you come, it's for everyone, it's not for yourself. When you go to hunt, you come, it's for everyone, you call everyone to partake. So it becomes difficult now when you live in that communal sense and you have opportunities, you need to think about the other people, that is your brothers, if not sometimes, and it's because of the bad, I don't think the right, it's not the right mindset that many people had about business, is that when you go to public positions, people think that you need to put your own border there, because it's a habit that people have been doing. But I think when people would go, as people are entering into business, they want to look for the most competent. And sometimes it's inevitable also that you also want to start your business with people you can trust. So it's not a bad thing also to have your friends and family. It's not a bad thing, but once your business is growing, you need to know that there's a diverse community or diverse customers you need to address, meet their needs. And so you start thinking about other people coming in. And I think many African countries are going that way. And it's just like, even in America, you can see it sometimes. There are family organizations where it passed from one generation to another. And it's not a bad thing, but the issue is that when you want to go global or you want to go big, you need to integrate other people. And when they come there, they should also know that, yes, it's a family organization. And so it's not everybody, we respect hierarchy here in Africa. We have a culture of honor. So once you know that this is the big man's family, you have to give some respect, just like tradition. And so there are some things we need to rectify and see how we can adapt to this corporate world we are entering into, and know that diversity is very important for business, cultural diversity, and people take that into account. It's important to know that most African countries, the governments try to take into account regional balance, as how they call it. But sometimes the regional balance is just for marketing sake. It's not really bringing about inclusion, because they can be regional balance but no inclusion. So we are encouraging them to think about inclusion. And when there's inclusion, there's peace, there's understanding, there's room for dialogue, and room for knowing each other better. So that's why this issue of inclusion should be taken into consideration very seriously.
Yep. Jumping ahead to 2023, and just in our last couple of minutes, I want to ask about, because you mentioned about the rich diversity, not just of the ethnic groups, but the African languages. And, with the education system and that huge population you have of, obviously young people, are the schools, where are they at the moment with teaching African languages? And
it's really embarrassing to say, but it's just a way of saying that, a majority of Africans today, I wouldn't say a majority, but most of the learned Africans would speak English or French better than their own language. And it is because when we went to schools here, they are not African schools, in especially cities. The languages that we had to use were English and French. In the case of Cameroon, in Nigeria, it's English. In Cote d'Ivoire, it's French. In Equatorial Guinea, is Spanish. And so it has caused many people to disconnect themselves from their culture. And it's really a big issue, because it's one of the issues I addressed in my master's dissertations about 15 years back. And I was trying to address the issue of making people to really reconnect themselves to their culture. Because when you disconnect yourself to your culture, you lose your self-esteem. You don't know who you are, and you don't know where you're going. And it brings about identity crisis. Many people are struggling with this identity crisis. They don't know who they really are. And you see people who grow and they want to become something that they are not. And then they would like to know their origins. There's this issue in America where former Black Americans want to know their origins, where they came from, and it's very important for them. It's just like an adopted child. When he discovers that he or she discovers that he's adopted, he always wants to know where he came from, because it's important. There's a saying in an African proverb that says that if you don't know where you're from, you cannot know where you're going to. So it's very important for people to know their true identity. And if we don't, there's a lot in Africa that we can learn, that many people from the world, because that's my vision, that each person has something to contribute to make the world better. We have a perspective that if it dies, many people will lose. And that is why we cannot continue to destroy the richness of our culture because we want to assimilate or acculturate ourselves to something that we are not. And so that's why we need to put a lot of emphasis on the teaching African languages and culture in our educational system. I'm somehow an activist on that and trying to push people to go towards that line. There are many African languages that are not written, which many people are working on. And so it's very important. It's a very important topic. It's a topic that I can talk almost take the whole day on it. And so that's why we need to really have a time for us to address these issues, because there are many things that in Africa, which if we tell you about how to, in political organizations, and then maybe we may have time to talk about that, because the issue of check and balances, it has been in Africa for centuries. That's how people have been working. Democracy, Africa has its own democracy based on consensus, and opposition is not part of our democracy. And we have our own way of resolving conflicts, which many people can inspire themselves from. There are many things we can learn from each other and make ourselves better and understand ourselves better. And if we think that others have to impose their own way on us, and we have seen where climate change has taken us to. People are thinking that they have made mistakes, and now they want to still be the very people leading the cause of bringing. You cannot be the solution to the problem that you caused. So it's time for us to be humble enough and see that we can learn from each other, and this planet belongs to all of us, and each person can bring his own contribution to make sure that we make the planet safe for everyone.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to wrap up the conversation. Wanah, I fully approve of your vision. You did open a little bit of a can of worms there, with talking about African democracy and how opposition isn't a part of it. I would love to have a whole 45 minutes just on that topic. And you did say at the start about in your article that about climate change, even the soil becomes prone to erosion when monoculture prevails. This is why environmentalists advocate for greater biodiversity in agriculture. And it's a great metaphor. And look, the work you're doing over there is tremendous. It's a lot of work to do. And it's just wonderful to have this chat with you. As I said, the article is up on our LinkedIn page, I think. And we've got a recording of this that we'll put up as well. We'd love you to be able to send it out to your friends, everybody that's here today. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box now. And also, we'll be back in about 3 months' time. We aim to do these webcasts quarterly. If anyone's got any cool ideas as to who we should interview next time, let us know. I've got a few in mind, but always open to new suggestions. But Wanah, thank you so much for joining us at 1 o'clock in the morning in Cameroon time. It's been absolutely illuminating and interesting and always fascinating talking to you. And congratulations on the article, Ethnic Diversity in Africa from Pitfall to Business Opportunity. It's not just important for Africa, it's important for everyone around the world to read articles like this. It's beautifully written, as I said, and I can't recommend it enough. So thank you everyone today for joining our inaugural webinar. It's been a pleasure. And have we got any? Roman's got a question. Is that a question? Thanks for sharing. Yes, that would have. Thank you, Roman, for attending. And so I think that about wraps it up. Thank you yet again, everybody. And hopefully we'll see you again in 3 months' time.